what Putin's going to be playing at here, he's going to try and claim extra territory by offering temporary ceasefires or even what he calls a permanent ceasefire. Ukraine's had, well, over 20 ceasefires with Russia since 2014, and Russia's broken every single one of them. So that's kind of his first goal, is to kind of play those delay tactics, get something in return for that without giving too much away.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford and welcome to Times Radio's Trump Report. Today I'm joined by Igor Novikov, former senior advisor to Zelensky, who oversaw US-Ukraine relations during the previous Donald Trump presidency. Thank you for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Thank you for inviting me again.
So we're days away from that meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska this Friday. We heard from the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt yesterday. She says that this will be a listening exercise for Trump. We'll try and get a better understanding of Putin's situation. What do you expect to be the outcome of this meeting?
Well, I don't think anyone knows. I don't think Putin and Trump know that either. But I think what's going to be happening is Putin is going to do his best to play off Trump's kind of short-term ambitions and basically try and give him what he expects within the next few months. But at the same time, he's going to try and keep his strategic initiative, because what's at stake here, what most people don't realize, is that this is not about Ukraine, not only about Ukraine. It's not only about Russia and the US. It's about what the future world looks like. Because I think we're too far gone for any possibility of return to a post-Yalta environment, to something that even remotely resembles what we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think, the biggest danger here lies in the fact that President Trump, because of his personality, because of what we've seen so far from him, he's going to be trying to achieve those kind of short-term victories, that the proverbial Nobel Peace Prize and everything like that. Whereas Putin is going to be playing long-term, and he's going to be trying to kind of cement against all odds Russia's position as a superpower in that new picture of the new world that we are kind of moving fast towards.
And when you talk about Trump's short-term ambitions, we had, before Trump came into office, he said that he could end this war in a day. It's now over 200 days since he started his second administration. The war has not come to an end. Do you think that Trump's patience is wearing thin with Putin, especially in terms of the language he's been using recently, directed towards Putin? It's been pretty negative. I mean, he's accused Putin of talking bullshit. Do you think that there is a change of attitude there?
It is, but it's short-lived. I mean, I've met President Trump. I worked with his previous administration. I mean, I know this administration quite well, and I can tell you this, that all of those emotions and all the short-term kind of decision-making, that's emotional. That's not something that's going to deter Putin. That's not something that's going to put Russia in danger of that pressure that could have ended this war quicker. With Russia, there's a rule of thumb. You need to understand this. They only understand strength. Their entire society is built on, the strong preying on the weak. And therefore, any compromise with them that comes from any other position than a position of strength is doomed to failure.
Zelensky's already said that he would reject any proposal to give up the Donbass region in exchange for a ceasefire, but Trump has said that any peace deal would involve some land swapping, but he did say that he hopes to get prime territories back for Ukraine. When you talk about how Putin likes being met with power, but Trump's coming at this position of concession as well, is that going to play into Trump's hand at all? Or
no, it's not. It's not going to play into Trump's hand. I think there's a situation on the ground, and Ukraine and the global society in general, that everyone deserves just peace. I think war is horrible, and it should be stopped. But at the same time, what Putin's going to be playing at here, he's going to try and claim extra territory by offering temporary ceasefires or even what he calls a permanent ceasefire. Ukraine's had, well, over 20 ceasefires with Russia since 2014, and Russia's broken every single one of them. So that's kind of his first goal, is to kind of play those delay tactics, get something in return for that without giving too much away. But there's also a second factor at play here. Ukraine is a democratic society and a democratic country. We have a constitution that determines our land borders and everything. And Zelensky is, one of the biggest problems that Putin has with Ukraine, and one of the reasons it wasn't as easy for him as he expected. Therefore, he's going to try and play this card with Trump by insisting on those land swaps that are unconstitutional. But at the same time, Trump doesn't realize that, in a democracy, any potential kind of agreements need to be approved by the people. And therefore, he's going to be trying to throw Zelensky under this bus of having to agree to something without a referendum, without getting the Ukrainian people to approve it, thus making it illegal, thus kind of potentially getting rid of Zelensky, which was one of his main goals. So that's important to understand. And Trump doesn't get the complexity of that, and therefore, if Putin doesn't get his land swaps, at least he can redirect Trump's anger and dissatisfaction towards Zelensky again.
I mean, on the other hand, as it currently stands, I mean, Russia has almost all of Luhansk. It's believed to have around 70% of the Donetsk region. If no territory is conceded to Russia in order for them to agree to some sort of ceasefire moving towards ending the war, what incentive does Putin have to agree to that?
Well, once again, returning to what I said about Russia understanding the position of strength, what's at play here, what everyone is playing at, probably sometimes with the exception of President Trump, is what that future world looks like. And it's going to be completely different from what we are used to and what we're seeing today. Therefore, if you want Putin to give you concessions, if you want Putin, if you have a place for him in that world, and that place does not involve Russia being a superpower or a bully, a global bully, you need to unify and you need to put them in the position where they have to choose between the rock and the hard place. That's the only way of doing it. I'm not seeing that happen just yet. Does President Trump and the West do they have the instruments to kind of make it happen? They do. The Russian economy is not doing that great. The only major advantage that Russia has now is cannon fodder, and the fact that they can afford to lose millions of Russian lives. They're building up on technology. That's the most dangerous part here. Therefore, if you want Russia to stop, you need to unify Europe. You need to unify the US. You need to unify the so-called proverbial West. And you need to put all the potential leverage on the table and say, look, Russia, unless you stop for real, here's what's going to happen. We're going to destroy your economy. We're going to arm Ukraine to the teeth. And, you're a nuclear power. So this war is not winnable for anyone if it gets beyond a certain point. But we won't make it winnable for you with your cannon fodder and your drones and everything. And that's one part of the equation. The second part of the equation is that it's not only about Russia. It's more about China. It's more about India. It's more about BRICS and so on and so forth. Therefore, at the moment, ironically, the only real winner of what's going on in the world and a real winner long term is China. And therefore, unless kind of that situation is addressed, we are slowly but surely heading to a world where China will be dictating the terms to everyone, probably including the US at some point. Therefore, that's the real danger. And I think that's what President Trump needs to keep in the back of his mind.
And prior to the agreement of this meeting, Trump had set that deadline to Putin, saying that you should either make progress to end this war or face further sanctions. That deadline's now passed, but we did see the US impose sanctions on India because they get a lot of their energy and fuel from Russia. But I want to know, do you think that at the moment, from what we can see so far, if this is working in Trump's intention of trying to push India to put pressure on Russia to end this war, or if in turn it's actually pushing India towards depending on Russia?
Have you read The Boy Who Cried Wolf? I don't think we're seeing any effects just yet from India because for two reasons. One, they're still somewhat shocked by it actually happening because with Trump, it's sometimes about show business and those like loud statements that don't lead anywhere. Secondly, I think especially the countries like India and China, they understand that Trump is more about short-term kind of effects, those kind of TV hype rather effects rather than long-term strategy. Therefore, I think that kind of they are holding out and trying to see whether it's for real and it's for long term. Because if it's just a short-term scare tactic, they're not going to react to it. In fact, it's going to push them closer to Russia. So, kind of the bottom line here is that it has to be about long-term strategy. It has to be about that kind of proverbial genie world where you kind of rub the lamp and you can have your wishes, but you need to understand what you're wishing for. You need to understand the end goal, the end result, what that world looks like, what position the US has in it, what position desired positions are for Russia and China, India, and everyone else. And then you have to retroactively kind of move towards it. So you need to trace it back to the point of today and see how we can get to that world. Because if it's all about hype and clickbait and loud slogans, we might see some short-term effects. But at the end of the day, within a year or 3 years, a maximum 5 years, we're gonna probably much sooner because of like artificial intelligence and the warfare 2.0 and everything. We're gonna arrive in a world where China is the new superpower.
Caroline Levitt, she confirmed that the US president will be meeting with Putin alone. There was speculation that maybe Zelensky might be joining, but so far it's believed that he won't be. There is fears that if Zelensky isn't there, Ukraine will be sidelined in this meeting. But we are expecting to have Zelensky and some other European leaders having an online call with Trump today before this meeting. I mean, I think the intentions of this is to try and put pressure onto Trump to side with Ukraine. But do you think that they can achieve that?
Once again, everything needs to be approached through this lens of short term. It could be achieved short term, but Trump's mood is going to change before Friday. Will he be in the same room as Putin? Most likely, unless something happens where you see a black swan, a white swan, whatever. They're going to be in the same room. So whatever happens today is unlikely to majorly affect the outcome of what happens on Friday. Therefore, with Trump, you need to approach it constantly and consistently. So is that call useful, teleconference? Yes. I mean, we can put some fundamentals on the table, kind of draw those red lines. But at the same time, like Friday is a standalone event. And anything that happens before it is pretty much a non sequitur.
What could change Trump's mood then? When you say, it depends.
Anything. A tweet he reads, a news story. That's the danger here. There's so many determining factors, and what really kind of frightens me is the fact that on the other side of the table, beyond that proverbial iron curtain, we're dealing with former KGB. Well, there's no such thing as former KGB people who think long term, who use a thing called reflexive control, where they're trying to kind of push you to having to make a decision between a bad situation and a worse situation, and who approach it long term and understand the psychology of President Trump and what determines his decisions and his emotions and everything like that. Therefore, a teleconference we're seeing today is good, but it doesn't kind of doesn't make Friday any less scary.
I mean, what would your advice be to Zelensky on how to approach this online call today then?
Well, I'll keep it to myself if I may, because there are certain things that I've already kind of passed along, and secondly, there are certain things that will be useful, but if I say them out loud, it could be used against us. So, unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And let me give you one example to see where I'm coming from with this. Why I'm less worried about Friday, more worried about where we had it. Like, there's one project I'm working on. If and when, probably if this war stops, sooner or later the airports are going to reopen in Ukraine. And from what I've personally seen with my own eyes on the front lines, and what everyone has seen with those, for example, FPV drones, that's a threat that every Ukrainian airport is going to face, because a $500 drone can come undetected and destroy, the $50 million plane. Hopefully without people, but can destroy it in the air as well. And like that's the threat that Ukraine is facing, has to work with, and Russia's interested in those hybrid tactics. By the way, that's another thing. We allowed them to continue hybrid war, so we're likely to see more of those wars in the future, not only from Russia, but instigated by the likes of Iran, North Korea, and so on and so forth. But the FPV, the war might go away, but the FPV drones are not going to go away, and you have a major civilian airport in pretty much in every major city in the world. Now, how are you going to deal with that? And which side of the Iron Curtain is likely to use that hybrid tactic? So that's like my major problem, and that's one of the problems that we're facing out of hundreds. And like, how do you keep the West's dominant position in a world like that, where you're faced with hybrid threats, where you don't kind of meet them, from the position of strength and unity? And how do you keep that place? How do you keep the West relevant? How do you adapt to that? Because China is going to sit this one out, because they're interested in having Putin as the world bully. He does all the dirty work pretty much for everyone else. But at the same time, like, how do we contain it? How do we reverse it? How do we put enough pressure on him to make sure that in that world we don't have FPV drones taking down, civilian planes in the West or in Ukraine? How do we keep that hybrid terrorism away? That's what everyone should be thinking about right now. Because regardless of what happens on Friday, it's just, one step towards, the future that we're going to face eventually. And, it's an important step. Could be a good or a bad step, but it's only one step. But at the moment, we're headed towards a very bad destination. That's what keeps me up at night.
What do you think the answer is to that? I know that's a big question, but do you think that there is an answer to it? Do you think it is international pressure, strength, power?
Well, with Russia's strength, I mean, like, if I were, and I never will be, obviously, because I'm Ukrainian, but if I were the president of the United States and I had all the tools at my disposal, I would have ended it in a month, this war. Because
But how?
sanctions, arming Ukraine, putting pressure on all Russian allies, doing what the US did with Iran, but on a larger scale, and basically showing Putin that bluffing and the hybrid kind of thousand cut kind of tactics, they don't work against us. We're united. We have the economic strength. We have the military strength. We are on the side of good here rather than evil, and good is going to prevail. It's as simple as that. The problem is that Putin is very good at weaponizing the fundamentals against the West. He's even turned, if you pay close attention to what happens in different elections in different democratic countries, he's weaponized democracy against the very countries that kind of live in a democracy. So he's made that a hybrid weapon. Now, we are too far gone to return to the world that we're used to, kind of instinctively, to something that resembles like 20 or 30 years ago. And we just need to drop the hypocrisy and approach things at face value and just say, like, look, the guy's weaponizing democracy. We need to adapt democracy to kind of withstand that pressure and those threats. Same goes for everything else. Like, because if we pretend that we're still living in 1999, then, unfortunately, we're going to end up in 1939. That's how it goes.
Igor, thank you so much for joining me in the Trump Report today.
Thank you.